By the final days of Operation Linebacker II, the battlefield had changed dramatically. The United States had modified its tactics. North Vietnam had strengthened its defenses. Both sides had paid a heavy price. But the campaign was never intended to be decided only in the skies above Hanoi. Its real objective was political. On December 30th, 1972, President Richard Nixon ordered a halt to the bombing campaign north of the 20th parallel. The largest strategic air offensive of the Vietnam War had come to an end. Just days later, North Vietnamese negotiators returned to the peace talks in Paris. After weeks of renewed negotiations, both sides reached an agreement. On January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were officially signed. Under the agreement, the United States agreed to withdraw its remaining military forces from Vietnam. American prisoners of war would be released and returned home. North Vietnamese forces already positioned in South Vietnam would remain in place. A ceasefire was declared. For Washington, the agreement provided a path to end direct American military involvement. For Hanoi, it preserved the military gains that had already been achieved on the battlefield. The bombing campaign remains one of the most debated operations in modern military history. Some American historians argue that Operation Linebacker II forced North Vietnam back to the negotiating table and helped secure the final agreement. Others believe that both sides had already accepted most of the major terms before the bombing began, and that the campaign mainly accelerated negotiations that were already close to completion. North Vietnamese historians often present a different conclusion. They argue that the country's integrated air defense system proved it could survive even the most powerful strategic bombing campaign conducted by the United States. They point to the successful defense of Hanoi as a demonstration of determination, organization, and tactical adaptation. Regardless of which interpretation is accepted, one fact is beyond dispute. Operation Linebacker II permanently changed the way air warfare would be studied. The campaign exposed the danger of predictable planning. American commanders discovered that even advanced technology could become vulnerable when tactical patterns were repeated. After the war, the United States Air Force carefully analyzed every mission. Training programs were rewritten. Mission planning became far more flexible. Greater emphasis was placed on deception, unpredictable routing, electronic warfare, and real-time intelligence. The lessons learned over Hanoi influenced American air operations for decades. Future campaigns in the Middle East and elsewhere reflected many of the changes first recognized during those 12 days in December. North Vietnam also drew important lessons. Its commanders proved that an older missile system could remain highly effective when supported by disciplined crews, coordinated radar stations, and continuous tactical adaptation. The campaign demonstrated that success in modern warfare depends not only on superior equipment, but also on the ability to learn faster than the opponent. The human element proved decisive. Radar operators working under intense pressure. Missile crews making split-second decisions. Bomber pilots flying through walls of exploding missiles. Electronic warfare specialists searching for ways to protect the formation. Every individual played a role in shaping the outcome. When the bombing ended, both sides claimed victory. The United States argued that it had achieved its political objective by bringing negotiations to a conclusion. North Vietnam argued that it had defended its capital against the world's most powerful air force. History continues to debate which claim carries greater weight. What is certain is that Operation Linebacker II became one of the defining air campaigns of the Cold War. It demonstrated the enormous destructive power of strategic bombing. It revealed both the strengths and the limitations of advanced military technology. Most importantly, it showed that no weapon is invincible. Even the mighty B-52 could be defeated when its weaknesses were understood. More than 50 years later, military academies around the world still study the 12 days over Hanoi. Not simply because of the aircraft, not simply because of the missiles, but because the campaign revealed one of the timeless truths of warfare. Victory does not belong to the side with the most powerful weapon. Victory belongs to the side that can adapt faster than its enemy. That is why the battle over Hanoi remains one of the most important case studies in modern military history. And it is why the story of how Vietnam challenged America's most powerful bomber continues to fascinate historians, military professionals, and audiences around the world. By the end of the first night, both sides had learned something important. The United States believed the bombing campaign was working. North Vietnam believed it had discovered the weaknesses in the American plan. That difference would shape everything that followed. The Soviet-built SA-2 guideline missile had already gained a deadly reputation during the Vietnam War. But shooting down a B-52 was far more difficult than destroying a fighter aircraft. The bomber flew at high altitude. Its electronic jamming filled radar screens with powerful interference. Many American planners believed the missile crews would be nearly blind. Instead, North Vietnamese air defense units adapted faster than anyone expected. Radar operators stopped chasing perfect radar returns. Instead, they learned to identify the movement of the electronic noise itself. The brightest area of interference often marked the location of the bomber formation. Experienced operators manually guided their missiles toward the center of the jamming cloud. It required enormous skill. Unlike automatic tracking, every correction had to be made by hand. The missile crews worked under tremendous pressure. Each launch had only seconds to succeed. Many missiles missed. Some exploded harmlessly behind the bombers. Others lost guidance inside the electronic interference. But every engagement improved their experience. Every failed shot taught another lesson. North Vietnam also changed how its missile batteries operated. American planners expected missile sites to remain fixed. Instead, many launch crews became highly mobile. After firing several missiles, they quickly relocated before American Wild Weasel aircraft could destroy them. Camouflage became another critical advantage. Launchers disappeared under trees. Radar vehicles were hidden inside villages or beside roads. Dummy launch sites were also constructed. American pilots often attacked empty positions while real missile batteries prepared for the next strike. Communication between radar stations also improved. Instead of relying on one tracking radar, multiple observation posts shared information. Visual observers reported bomber formations. Early warning stations followed incoming aircraft from long distances. This allowed missile commanders to prepare before the bombers reached Hanoi. The defense became a coordinated network instead of isolated missile sites. Meanwhile, problems continued inside the American operation. Strategic Air Command still relied on nearly identical attack patterns. 3 aircraft cells approached along predictable routes. Altitude differences remained almost unchanged. Timing between formations stayed consistent. For experienced North Vietnamese commanders, the bombers were beginning to arrive almost like trains following a timetable. One technical weakness became especially dangerous. Many of the newer B-52G bombers carried electronic jamming equipment that was optimized for threats in front of the aircraft. After releasing their bombs, crews followed standard procedures by making a sharp right turn toward their exit route. During that turn, parts of the aircraft became exposed to missile tracking radar. For a brief but critical moment, the protective electronic shield became much weaker. North Vietnamese radar crews noticed the pattern almost immediately. Instead of launching missiles as the bombers approached, they waited. They allowed the aircraft to complete their bomb run. Then, just as the bombers entered the predictable right turn, the missiles were fired. The results shocked American commanders. Several B-52s were struck during exactly this maneuver. Some managed to limp back to friendly territory despite severe damage. Others exploded in the sky over North Vietnam. Entire crews were killed. Others parachuted into captivity. The psychological effect was enormous. For years, the B-52 had symbolized American strategic power. Now, television cameras around the world showed burning wreckage scattered across the outskirts of Hanoi. American officials insisted the campaign remained successful. North Vietnamese newspapers celebrated every bomber destroyed. Each side fought not only in the air, but also for public opinion. Inside Strategic Air Command headquarters, concern quickly turned into frustration. General officers demanded explanations. How could one of the world's most advanced bombers be suffering such losses? Intelligence officers reviewed combat reports from every surviving crew. Pilots described heavy missile activity. Electronic warfare specialists reported that enemy operators were adapting faster than expected. Escort aircraft confirmed that missile launches were becoming increasingly accurate. The conclusion became unavoidable. The problem was not the B-52 itself. The problem was the tactics. Flying the same routes night after night had given the defenders valuable information. Predictable timing had allowed missile crews to prepare. Standard turning procedures had exposed vulnerable moments. The campaign could not continue this way. Changes had to be made immediately. While American commanders debated new plans, North Vietnamese missile crews prepared for another night. They believed they finally understood how the giant bombers behaved. Confidence spread throughout the air defense network. Missile stocks were replenished. Radar crews reviewed the previous battles. Commanders assigned sectors of responsibility across the entire defense system. Every new raid became another opportunity. Both sides now understood each other's strengths. Both sides also understood each other's weaknesses. The next phase of Operation Linebacker II would become a contest of adaptation. Whichever side learned faster would control the skies over Hanoi. And within days, the United States would completely redesign the largest bombing campaign of the Vietnam War. After the heavy losses during the opening nights, the United States faced a difficult choice: continue using the same tactics and risk losing more B-52 bombers, or completely redesign the operation while the campaign was still underway. Strategic Air Command chose the second option. The changes came quickly. Attack routes were rewritten. Bomber formations no longer approached from only one direction. Different groups entered North Vietnam at different times. The spacing between formations changed. Instead of giving defenders a predictable pattern, the bombers became far more difficult to anticipate. The timing of the attacks also changed. Earlier raids had arrived in separate waves spread across several hours. This gave North Vietnamese missile crews valuable time to reload launchers and reposition radar systems. Now American commanders wanted to overwhelm the entire defense network at once. On the night of December 26, the United States launched the largest B-52 strike of the entire war. More than 120 bombers entered North Vietnamese airspace in a massive coordinated assault. For the first time, dozens of bomber cells approached almost simultaneously. Instead of concentrating on a single attack corridor, they crossed the target area from multiple directions. The goal was simple: force the missile crews to fight too many targets at the same time. Electronic warfare also became more aggressive. EB-66 electronic warfare aircraft increased radar jamming across the region. Fighter aircraft released thousands of strips of aluminum chaff into the sky. The thin metal strips created enormous false radar echoes. Entire radar screens became covered with moving clouds of interference. Wild Weasel crews continued hunting North Vietnamese radar stations with anti-radiation missiles. Whenever a missile battery activated its radar, it risked becoming a target itself. F-111 fighter bombers attacked airfields and support facilities. F-4 Phantom fighters protected the bomber force against possible MiG interceptions. It became one of the largest combined air operations ever conducted by the United States Air Force. North Vietnam responded with equal determination. Radar operators had already expected another massive attack. Missile batteries remained dispersed around Hanoi. Commanders carefully controlled missile launches. Instead of firing immediately, many batteries waited until bombers entered their assigned engagement zones. Every missile had become valuable. Years of bombing had made resupply increasingly difficult. Crews could no longer afford to waste shots. The battle above Hanoi became a contest of endurance. Missiles climbed through the night sky. Electronic jamming covered radar frequencies. Explosions illuminated the clouds. Bomber crews reported seeing dozens of missile launches at once. Some pilots described the sky as being filled with streams of fire. Despite the improved American tactics, North Vietnam still achieved successes. Several B-52 bombers were damaged. Some failed to return to their bases. Others barely survived with severe structural damage. But compared with the opening nights, the losses had fallen significantly. The tactical changes were working. At the same time, American bombing accuracy improved. Rail yards, military storage facilities, power stations, communication centers, air defense headquarters. Many strategic targets suffered heavy damage. Transportation around Hanoi became increasingly difficult. North Vietnamese leaders now faced growing pressure. The country's air defense network had fought with extraordinary determination, but every night consumed more missiles, more equipment, more trained personnel. The bombing campaign was becoming a war of attrition. American commanders also understood that they could not continue indefinitely. Every destroyed B-52 represented years of production and highly trained crews. Each aircraft carried 6 men. Replacing both machines and experienced personnel would take time. The campaign had reached a critical balance. Neither side could claim complete victory. Neither side had achieved complete air superiority. Instead, both had demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt under pressure. Military historians still study this phase of the campaign because it revealed an important lesson. Technology alone does not guarantee success. The B-52 was one of the most advanced bombers ever built. The SA-2 missile system had first entered service more than a decade earlier. On paper, the American aircraft should have dominated. Instead, the outcome depended on planning, flexibility, training, and the ability to learn faster than the enemy. Each night became a classroom. American commanders corrected tactical mistakes. North Vietnamese missile crews refined their interception techniques. Both sides improved continuously. By the final days of Operation Linebacker II, the battle looked completely different from the first night. The Americans no longer flew predictable routes. The missile crews no longer relied on the same firing methods. The campaign had evolved into one of the most sophisticated air battles of the Cold War. But while the fighting continued above Hanoi, another battle was unfolding far from the battlefield. Diplomats were preparing to return to Paris. And the political consequences of these 12 days would shape the final chapter of America's involvement in Vietnam. How Vietnam outsmarted America's B-52 strategy, December 18, 1972. The United States launched one of the largest strategic bombing campaigns since World War II. More than 100 B-52 bombers crossed the skies over North Vietnam. American military planners believed the operation would force Hanoi back to the negotiating table within days. The B-52 had earned a fearsome reputation. It could fly higher than most fighters. It could carry more than 30 tons of bombs. Its electronic warfare systems were designed to confuse enemy radar. Many believed it was almost impossible to stop. But only hours after the first wave entered North Vietnamese airspace, one of the world's most powerful bombers exploded in flames over Hanoi. Then another, and another. Within just a few nights, the impossible had happened. North Vietnam had found a way to shoot down America's most feared bomber. The question is not simply how. The real question is why the United States made it possible. To understand what happened, we first need to look at the situation in late 1972. By then, the Vietnam War had entered a new phase. Most American ground troops had already left Vietnam. President Richard Nixon had begun the policy known as Vietnamization. The goal was to transfer more of the fighting to South Vietnamese forces while reducing the American military presence. At the same time, peace negotiations were taking place in Paris. Months of talks had produced little progress. Both sides remained deeply divided over the future of South Vietnam. Then came the Easter Offensive in the spring of 1972. North Vietnam launched a massive conventional invasion across several fronts. The attack shocked Washington. Although South Vietnamese forces eventually stopped the offensive with massive American air support, the fighting convinced Nixon that stronger pressure was needed. Operation Linebacker successfully disrupted North Vietnamese supply lines during the summer. Yet political negotiations once again reached a deadlock by December. Nixon decided to use America's greatest strategic weapon short of nuclear force. The plan became known as Operation Linebacker II. Many Americans later called it the Christmas bombing. The mission had a simple objective: destroy key military infrastructure around Hanoi and Haiphong, cripple transportation networks, damage command centers, pressure North Vietnam into accepting the peace agreement. To carry out the operation, Strategic Air Command assembled one of the largest B-52 forces ever committed to combat. Bombers flew from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam. Others departed from U Tapao Air Base in Thailand. Supporting them were hundreds of additional aircraft, electronic warfare planes, fighter escorts, Wild Weasel aircraft designed to attack surface-to-air missile sites, reconnaissance aircraft, air refueling tankers. The entire operation involved one of the most complex aerial strike packages ever organized. On paper, the plan looked overwhelming. The B-52 had never been designed primarily for conventional bombing. It had been built to deliver nuclear weapons deep inside the Soviet Union. Its electronic countermeasures were considered among the best in the world. American commanders believed Soviet-made SA-2 missiles would struggle against such powerful jamming. But confidence created a dangerous problem. Strategic Air Command relied on carefully planned procedures developed during the Cold War. The bombers flew in predictable 3 aircraft cells. Each formation maintained fixed spacing. Each aircraft followed nearly identical routes. The first 3 nights used almost the same attack corridors. The timing remained highly organized. From an American perspective, this reduced the risk of mid-air collisions and simplified command and control. From the ground, however, North Vietnamese radar operators saw something entirely different. Instead of random attacks, they saw patterns. The bombers arrived from the same directions. They turned at nearly identical locations. They exited using almost identical escape routes. Each new raid confirmed the previous night's observations. At first, the electronic jamming worked exactly as expected. Radar screens filled with interference. Operators struggled to identify individual aircraft, but North Vietnamese air defense crews had spent years preparing for exactly this situation. Many had already studied American bombing techniques during Operation Rolling Thunder. Others received extensive training from Soviet advisors. Rather than relying entirely on radar automation, they learned how to fight through heavy electronic interference. Instead of searching for a perfect radar picture, they learned to recognize movement inside the wall of jamming. They watched how the interference itself shifted across the screen. Experienced operators discovered that the strongest jamming often revealed where the bombers actually were. The electronic shield designed to hide the B-52s was slowly becoming a guide. Night after night, North Vietnamese commanders collected more information. They measured flight paths. They estimated bomb release points. They tracked turning maneuvers after each attack. Every raid became another lesson. Every American success revealed another piece of the puzzle. Neither side fully realized it yet. But one of the most important tactical battles of the Vietnam War had already begun. One side relied on technology. The other relied on patience, observation, and adaptation. and within only a few days, that difference would change the entire campaign forever.